Daniel Carter never thought his life would take him to the grand court of a queen. He had been a soldier for many years, serving on distant colonies and fighting battles that wore down his body and soul. Yet he never searched for honor or medals. He only wanted peace. After the last war ended, he was sent back to the capital, where a new duty awaited him. He did not know that this duty would change everything. The palace stood high above the city, with towers of stone and shining glass. It was a place where nobles walked with pride, where whispers carried secrets, and where common men were rarely seen. Daniel walked through the gates wearing the simple uniform of a soldier. He did not feel he belonged there. The marble floors, the golden walls, and the guards in polished armor all reminded him that he was just a man of the field, not of the court. He was brought before Queen Eleanor. She was tall, with dark hair tied back, and her eyes sharp enough to quiet a room with a glance. She ruled not only with power, but also with wisdom, though many in the court feared her as much as they respected her. Daniel bowed low, his hands at his side, unsure why he had been called. The queen studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You are Daniel Carter, son of a farmer, soldier of the border wars," she said. Her voice carried across the chamber. "You have been chosen to serve here, in this palace, not as a fighter, but as a guardian." Daniel looked up, surprised. "A guardian, my queen?" "Yes," she said, her tone steady. "For my daughter." The words struck him like a blow. To protect the child of the queen was no small task. He thought of the dangers, not from outside enemies, but from the very walls of the court. The nobles, with their hunger for power, would watch his every move. He felt the weight of this duty settle upon his shoulders, but he did not refuse. Instead, he bowed again and said, "I will serve with honor." That was how Daniel first met Princess Lila. She was only 8 years old, a child with golden hair and bright eyes that seemed to carry both innocence and questions too deep for her age. When Daniel entered her chambers for the first time, she looked at him not with fear, but with curiosity. "Are you the new guard?" she asked. "Yes, princess," Daniel said softly. "I am here to keep you safe." She tilted her head, studying him. "You do not look like the others. You're not like the lords and knights." Daniel smiled faintly. "I am not, princess. I am just a soldier." That seemed to please her. "Good," she said. "I do not like the lords. They speak too many words and never listen." From that day, Daniel stood by her side. He walked with her in the gardens, stood watch during her lessons, and guarded her door at night.
Oh.
The more time he spent with her, the more he saw how lonely she was. The queen was often busy with affairs of the kingdom, and the nobles treated the child more as a symbol than a person. But Daniel spoke to her as one would to a real child, answering her endless questions with patience. In return, she began to smile more when he was near. The court, however, did not look kindly on his presence. Whispers followed him in the halls. "A commoner guarding the air," they muttered. "Soldier given trust meant for knights." Yet Daniel paid them no mind. His duty was not to them, but to the small girl who had begun to see him as more than a guard. One evening, as the sun set beyond the palace walls, Leela asked him, "Do you have children?" "Daniel?" He shook his head. "No, princess. I have never had a family of my own." She was quiet for a moment and then said, "That is sad. Everyone should have someone to call family." Daniel felt a weight in his chest at her words, but he only nodded. "Perhaps one day." The child smiled, as if she already knew something he did not. And in that quiet moment, Daniel understood that his life in the palace was not only about duty, it was the beginning of something far greater, something that neither he nor the court could yet see. Daniel Carter soon learned that life inside the palace was very different from the world he had known. On the battlefield, everything was clear. There was an enemy, there was a goal, and there was survival. In the palace, the danger was hidden. It lived in the words of the nobles and the quiet looks they gave, and in the games they played with power. Daniel was not trained for this kind of fight, but he could feel it all around him. Every day he watched over Princess Lila. She grew more attached to him, and he to her. We walked with her in the gardens where fountains sang and roses bloomed in careful rows. He stood guard during her lessons where scholars taught her the histories of kingdoms and the duties of a ruler. And in the quiet hours of evening, when the halls grew still, she asked him questions that few dared to answer. "Daniel," she said one night, as they sat by the great windows looking at the stars. "Why do the nobles look at you as if you do not belong here?" Daniel thought for a moment. He could not lie to her, but he also did not want to trouble her heart. "Because I am not like them," he said simply. "They were born into great families. I was born on a farm. They believe that makes me less." Lila frowned. "But you are brave, you are kind. You listen when I speak. It makes you more, not less." Daniel felt a small warmth in his chest. "Thank you, Princess. Your words mean more than theirs ever could." In the court, however, the whispers grew louder. Some lords spoke openly now, saying it was wrong for a common soldier to be so close to the heir. Lady Marin, a sharp-tongued noblewoman, told the queen that it was unsafe, that the soldier might fill the child's head with simple thoughts not fit for a princess. Queen Eleanor listened, but she did not yet remove Daniel from his duty. She watched instead, weighing his actions with her keen eyes. One afternoon, the queen herself came to the gardens while Daniel was teaching Lila how to throw a wooden ball. The princess laughed as she missed and chased it across the grass. Eleanor stood near Daniel and said, "She is happier with you than with all her tutors." Daniel bowed. "She is a child, my queen. Children need more than books. They need to laugh. They need someone who sees them as they are." The queen studied him for a long time. "You see her as she is?" "Yes," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Not as a princess, but as a child who deserves care." Eleanor said nothing more, but her eyes softened for a moment before she turned away. Daniel knew then that she was testing him, not just as a guard, but as a man. As weeks passed, Lila began to call for Daniel more often than anyone else. When she was frightened of the dark, she asked for him. When she was proud of finishing her lessons, she wanted him to hear it first. The bond between them grew strong, and soon it became clear to all who watched. Some nobles shook their heads in disapproval, others whispered of danger, but none could deny what their eyes saw. The child trusted Daniel more than anyone. One evening, during a gathering in the grand hall, Lila walked among the nobles, her small hand holding Daniel's. The lords and ladies stared, their eyes wide with disbelief. Children of royalty were never seen clinging to guards, yet Lila did not care. She tugged his hand and said loudly, "Daniel, will you sit near me?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one sat near the heir but blood family or nobles of highest rank. Daniel froze, unsure what to do, but the queen lifted her hand. "Let him sit," she said. Her voice cut through the whispers. The hall fell quiet, and Daniel, though uneasy, obeyed. He sat near the child as she smiled with pride as though she had won a great victory. That night, when he returned to his quarters, Daniel lay awake thinking of the look on the nobles' faces. He knew the road ahead would be hard. They would not forgive his presence so easily. Yet when he remembered Lila's hand in his, he felt strength return. For her sake, he would endure whatever came. He had faced battles before, but this was different. This was not a war of swords or guns, but a war of trust, and he was determined not to lose. The weeks turned into months, and Daniel Carter's place in the palace became both stronger and more dangerous. Princess Leela trusted him more than anyone else, and the bond they shared was no longer hidden. Servants saw it, guards noticed it, and the nobles whispered of it with sharper tongues than before. Yet through all of this, Daniel never wavered. He remained calm, steady, and watchful, as he always had been. His duty was to protect the child, but in his heart, he knew it had grown into something greater. He wanted her to feel safe, cared for, and seen. The tension in the court grew heavy. One morning, during a meeting in the throne room, nobles gathered to speak with Queen Eleanor about matters of trade and war. Daniel stood at his post, near the princess, who sat quietly by her mother's side. The chamber was filled with voices, each noble trying to outdo the other with clever words. Lila grew restless, her small hand tugging at Daniel's sleeve as he leaned closer to hear her whisper. "Why do they all talk so much and say nothing?" she asked. I gave her a faint smile. "Because they are more concerned with being heard than being understood." The child laughed, but her voice carried farther than she meant it to. A few lords turned their heads sharply, frowning at Daniel as if the words had been his. Daniel straightened, his jaw firm, but he said nothing. He could feel the disapproval burning into him like a blade. Later that day, Queen Eleanor summoned him privately. He entered her chamber, bowing deeply, and waited for her to speak. She stood by the window, looking out at the city beyond the walls. Her tone was calm, yet strong. "We're drawing too much attention, Daniel," she said. "The court watches you closely. They will use any reason to strike." Daniel lifted his eyes. "I have done nothing but serve, my queen." Eleanor turned, her gaze sharp. "And that is why I allow you to remain. But know this, soldier, every step is weighed. Your bond with my daughter is both your strength and your danger. Do not forget it." Daniel bowed again. "I will not forget." That evening, he returned to Lila, who ran to greet him with open arms. She did not care about whispers or rules. To her, Daniel was not just a guard. He was someone who listened, who laughed, and who stayed when others were too busy. She pulled him into her play, and for a moment, the heaviness of the court melted away. One night, the queen held a great feast. Nobles from distant lands filled the hall, their jewels sparkling, their robes heavy with gold. Music played, and dancers moved across the floor. Daniel stood at his place, watching carefully, while Leela sat at the queen's side. The child's eyes moved across the hall, but she grew tired of the endless talk and performance. Suddenly, she rose from her seat and walked across the floor to where Daniel stood. The hall fell quiet as she reached for his hand. "Come," she said softly, but the silence made her words echo. Daniel froze. His heart pounded. Every noble in the room was staring, the queen's gaze fixed on him, unreadable. Yet the small hand of the princess pulled at him, and he could not bring himself to refuse. Slowly, he knelt so she could whisper in his ear, "You are always standing. Sit with me, please." Her request was so pure, so simple, that Daniel could not deny her. He rose and allowed her to lead him back to the high table. Gasps filled the hall. A soldier, a common man, was walking with the air of the crown in front of all the noble bloodlines of the kingdom. When they reached the table, Lila climbed onto her chair and pulled Daniel into the seat beside her. For a heartbeat, silence held the room like a storm before breaking. Whispers exploded. Lords and ladies muttered in outrage, and one man even stood to protest. "This is not proper," he cried. "The blood of the throne cannot sit with a common guard." But before the queen could answer, Lila looked up at Daniel and said, with a voice clear and full of certainty, "You are my father." The hall fell into a silence so deep that even the music stopped. Every noble froze, every servant held their breath, and Daniel sat stunned, his heart struck by the weight of her words. He had not expected this. He had never imagined it. Yet in that single moment, the child had spoken a truth that shattered the court. All eyes turned to Queen Eleanor. Her expression was unreadable, her face calm as stone, but her eyes burned with thought. She did not speak. The silence grew longer, heavier, until it seemed the walls themselves would crack beneath it. And there, in that silence, Daniel understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The words spoken by Princess Lila hung in the air like a thunderclap. No one in the great hall dared to move. Nobles who only moments ago had been laughing and trading whispers now stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel sat motionless, stunned by what the child had called him. He had never dreamed of hearing such a word within the walls of the palace. His heart pounded in his chest, but he did not speak, could not. All eyes turned to Queen Eleanor, waiting for her judgment. The queen rose slowly from her chair. Her presence commanded the hall, and even the boldest noble fell silent under her gaze. She looked first at her daughter, whose small face held only honesty, and then at Daniel, whose expression carried shock and humility. The queen's voice, calm and steady, broke the silence. "Explain this, Daniel," she said. Daniel stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He bowed low. "My queen, I did not place those words in the princess's mouth. She spoke from her own heart. I have only ever served as her guard." Lila tugged at her mother's gown. "It is true, mother. He listens. He cares. He is not like the others. He is like a father." The nobles gasped again. Some whispered angrily while others exchanged worried glances. One lord stepped forward, his voice sharp. "This is an outrage. A child of the crown cannot name a commoner as father. It weakens the bloodline. It insults the throne." But the queen lifted her hand, and the hall fell silent once more. "Enough," she said. Her eyes turned back to Daniel. "What say you to this, soldier? You accept the word she has given you?" Daniel's throat felt dry, but he spoke with honesty. "I never sought such a place, my queen, yet I cannot deny what she feels. No. I care for her as I would my own blood. I would protect her not only with my sword, but with my life." The hall grew tense. Some nobles muttered about danger, about ambition hidden beneath humility, but others, quieter, saw truth in his words. The queen studied him for a long time before speaking again.
"Oh."
"She is a child, and a child's heart is pure," the queen said at last. "What she has spoken cannot be undone. Whether it pleases you or not, the truth remains." The nobles erupted with noise, some crying out in anger, others begging the queen to reconsider. Yet her raised hand silenced them once again. "I am the queen," she declared, "and my daughter's happiness is not a matter for debate." From that day, everything changed. Daniel remained by the princess's side, but now every step he took was heavier. Some nobles treated him with open hostility, turning away when he passed. Others watched him with suspicion, searching for flaws to use against him. Yet Leela's trust never wavered. She clung to him more than ever, proud of the words she had spoken. She called him father in the gardens, in the halls, even in the presence of visiting lords. The weight of her words followed Daniel everywhere. At night, when he sat alone in his small chamber, he thought of the danger it brought. He knew there were those who would try to twist it, to use it against the queen, against the princess, and against him. When he remembered the child's smile, he knew he could not step away. He had faced war before, but now he faced something greater. This was not about his own life, but hers. One evening, Queen Eleanor called him to her private chamber again. She dismissed her attendants and stood before him, her expression unreadable. "You know what storm you stand in, Daniel," she said. "Do you regret it?" Daniel shook his head. "No, my queen, I cannot regret what I did not choose. She gave me that name of her own will. I would never betray it." The queen studied him carefully, then gave a single nod. "Then you must be prepared. The court will not rest. They will test you, they will test me, and above all, they will test her. But if you stand firm, then perhaps this will not weaken us, but make us stronger." Daniel bowed low. "I will stand, my queen, for her always." That night, as he returned to his post outside the princess's chamber, Daniel felt the weight of both fear and hope pressing upon him. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing beyond all doubt. No matter what trials came, he would not abandon the child who had given him the name of father. The days that followed were filled with tension. The court had been shaken by the words of Princess Lila, and every noble watched Daniel Carter as though he were a shadow that did not belong. Yet Daniel did not let their stares weaken him. He held his post with calm strength, always close to the princess, always ready to protect her. He knew the storm around him would not pass quickly. He knew he had stepped into a struggle larger than himself, but he also knew he could not walk away. Rumors spread through the palace. Some whispered that Daniel had bewitched the child. Others said the queen herself was losing control of her throne. Servants carried tales through the halls, and the lords whispered behind closed doors. Yet through it all, Lila never faltered. She spoke proudly, calling Daniel her father in the open, her voice so innocent that even the harshest nobles struggled to silence her. Her trust in him became a wall that no rumor could easily break. One afternoon during a council meeting, a noble named Lord Branton rose to his feet. He was a man of wealth and power, with many allies in the court. His voice rang with anger as he addressed the queen. "My queen," he said, "this cannot continue. A soldier, a common man, has been given the place of a father beside your heir. It dishonors the throne and invites weakness into our kingdom. Remove him now, or you risk the strength of your rule." The hall murmured in agreement, many nobles nodding. All eyes turned to Queen Eleanor. She sat tall upon her throne, her face calm, but her eyes sharp as steel. For a moment, she did not answer. Then she turned to Daniel, who stood silently near her daughter. "Speak, Daniel," she commanded. "Why should you remain in this place when so many wish to see you gone?" Daniel bowed his head, then lifted his voice for all to hear. "My queen, I was born with no crown. I have no wealth, no land, no noble blood. What I have is my word, and my word is that I will guard your daughter with my life. I did not ask for her to call me father. She gave me that name from her heart. To tear me from her now would not only wound me, but it would wound her. If you wish me gone, I will obey. But no, this I have no hunger for power. I have only love for the child who trusts me." The hall grew silent. Even those who despised him could not find fault in his words. Princess Leela clutched her mother's hand and cried out, "I will not let him go. He is my father." The queen rose slowly, her gaze sweeping over the hall. "Speak of dishonor," she said, her voice steady. "But I see no dishonor in a man who keeps his word and gives my daughter what this court never has: honesty and care. If my daughter names him father, then so he shall be. And if any here believe this weakens my throne, then let them step forward and challenge it." Not a single noble moved. The hall was silent, heavy with fear and respect. No one dared to stand against the queen's decree. From that day forward, Daniel's place was sealed. Though the nobles never fully accepted him, they could no longer deny him. He remained at Leela's side, not just as a guard, but as family. He walked with her through the gardens without shame. He sat with her during lessons and spoke to her, not as a symbol, but as a child. The queen allowed it, and the people beyond the palace began to whisper of it too. To them, the story was not one of scandal, but of hope that a man of no name could rise to such honor by his heart alone. Years later, when Princess Leela grew older, she would remember those days as the time when her world changed. And Daniel would remember them as the greatest duty of his life. Not because of the title she gave him, but because of the trust it carried. In the end, it was not the sword or the armor that made him strong, but the simple truth that love was greater than fear. And that trust could break even the silence of a court. The legend of the soldier who was called father by a princess spread beyond the palace walls, carried across cities and stars. It became a tale told to children and sung by travelers. And through it all, Daniel Carter remained the same man he had always been: humble, steady, and devoted. Now he was no longer alone. Had a family, and that was a treasure greater than any crown.